The radio was still talking after the man who owned it had stopped breathing.
It lay half-buried beside a black spruce stump, hissing through a sheet of freezing rain. And from that broken thing came my own voice, calling a name I hadn't said in 12 years. "Eli, don't turn around." The search dog beside me tucked its tail under its belly and began backing away.
I stood there with my hand on my pistol, staring into those trees. If you're hearing this, then someone decided to keep these tapes together after I'm gone. I don't know if anyone will believe an old ranger telling one more ugly story from the woods.
But if you stay with me, do one thing for me. Subscribe.
The Olympic Peninsula in winter is not the green postcard most tourists remember.
It's wet in a way that gets personal, seeping into wool, leather, wood, and bone.
The forest becomes one breathing thing, and every step sounds too loud.
Marcus Havel was careful, strong, and knew the Quinault Rainforest like his own kitchen. He'd gone in alone to inspect Blowdown, but he never checked back in.
At first, everything looked ordinary, but the trail held secrets.
The dogs worked clean for the first few miles, but then they stopped. They began whining and staring back down the trail toward the parking lot.
That was the first sign I should have respected.
Marcus had tied red flagging tape in knots I recognized from my youth. 3 short loops, 1 long tail. I told the deputy it meant Marcus had been marking Blowdown. That was my first lie. At 11:40, we found Marcus's saw. It was open and clean, resting on a stump as if placed there with care. Beside it were 3 pieces of cut yew branch, laid parallel in the mud. At noon, the first radio call came in from Marcus.
He said he was at the trailhead, but the trucks were gone.
Then the answer came back in 2 voices at once. I had heard that doubling before, 12 years ago, with a boy named Daniel Voss. In his notebook, the last page had a line written over and over. "It sounds like me from tomorrow." We pushed deeper into the brush, moving through the thick ferns and salal. The rain turned into a cold, biting sleet that chilled us to the bone. Every step felt heavier, like the forest itself was trying to slow us down. We passed that same fallen hemlock again, and I knew we were in trouble. Sonia checked her compass, but the needle was just drifting, like it was pointing somewhere else entirely. It wasn't just fog or bad luck. The land itself was changing under our boots. Then we heard him, Marcus's voice calling out from the trees ahead. He said the trail keeps coming back, and for a second, nobody moved. It was like the forest was playing tricks on our ears, making us doubt everything. We turned around and saw red tape everywhere, tied in those same knots I used to make. It hadn't been there a second ago, but now it was hanging from every single branch. My father's knot, staring back at me in the middle of this nightmare. Tiller just snapped. He couldn't take it anymore and started running. He passed between those 2 trees, and then he was just gone. We stared at the space where he'd been, but there was nothing left but the rain. 9 minutes later, his voice came through the radio, crying and saying he was right behind us. We all turned around, hoping to see him, but there was nobody there. Just the empty trail and the sound of the rain hitting the leaves. Carver threw his radio as far as he could, but the voice kept coming from his shoulder. He went completely gray, like all the life had just drained out of him. That was when we knew we were in a place where nothing made sense anymore. Then the sleet turned to snow, and the whole forest went quiet in a way that felt wrong.
Everything turned white, but the shadows stayed deep and dark. That's when I saw her, an old woman standing behind a cedar tree just watching us. I knew her. It was Ruth Tolman, but she had been dead for months.
She put a finger to her lips, telling me to be quiet.
Then she pointed toward a break in the brush, showing us a way out. We followed her path and found Marcus's rain shell hanging from a branch. It was zipped shut and filled with river stones, like it was some kind of offering. Sonia touched one of the stones and pulled back, her face showing just how scared she really was.
A scream tore through the woods from below.
We didn't think, we just ran toward it. We found a cabin that wasn't on any map.
Marcus was inside, just sitting there, waiting.
He was barely alive, but he had one last thing to say. He told me not to answer when it used that voice. Then someone stood in the doorway. It looked like Daniel, but it wasn't him. Carver fired, but it didn't do a thing. The woods were answering back. Marcus was gone, but the radio kept talking. It was all our voices, mixed together. Then Tiller screamed from under the floor. Carver reached for him, and the floor just took him. We didn't look back. We just ran. The forest was screaming at us. I saw them standing there between the trees. They were all there, waiting. We finally made it out, but we weren't the same. Some things are better left in the woods. Tiller was found 3 days later, just sitting in the truck.
He was alive, but he was missing 2 fingernails.
The official report just used clean words to bury the truth. Sonia transferred to Mount Rainier before spring.
We only spoke once after that, on the phone.
She asked if I dreamed of the red tape, then hung up.
I went to see Ruth Tolman 2 weeks later.
Her niece told me the truth I wasn't ready for. Ruth had died in her sleep months before the search. I asked if Ruth ever mentioned the old shelter.
Her niece looked at me for a long time.
She said Ruth warned us never to answer the woods.
I retired early, claiming bad knees and burnout. It was true enough to pass, I guess. But the forest never really let me go. Every January, my old radio turns itself on. I took the batteries out years ago. But it doesn't matter. It still hums. Most nights, it's just static. But last night, the static broke.
It was Marcus telling me the trail keeps coming back.
Then Tiller laughed, a soft, wet sound. He asked why I still wouldn't look at him. The house felt suddenly cold. Just before dawn, I saw it. A strip of red tape on the cedar tree. It was tied in my father's knot. I know what it means. The forest is waiting for me. Some trails always lead back to where you started. I stare at the red tape through the glass. It is not just plastic. It is a message from a place that should not exist. The forest has been watching me since the day I left. I walk away from the window. The house feels different now.
The floorboards creak like shifting trees.
I know I cannot stay here, but there is nowhere left to run. I reach for the closet door. My hand is trembling. The radio is inside, silent for now. It is waiting for the next signal. I open the door and see it sitting on the shelf. It looks exactly as it did in the woods. I should throw it away, but I can't bring myself to touch it. The static begins,
low and rhythmic.
It fills the small space.
I back away. The sound follows me, growing louder. I hear Marcus again.
His voice cuts through the noise. He is talking about the trail.
It is happening right now, somewhere in the dark.
Then Tiller joins him. His laughter is soft and wet.
He asks why I won't look at him.
I am not alone, and I never will be again.
I run to the front door.
I am desperate to escape.
But when I open it, there is no street. There is only the forest, dark and waiting.
I step out into the cold.
The mud pulls at my boots. The trees are bent inward, listening.
I know where this trail leads.
I walk into the trees.
The radio static fades into the wind.
I am finally home. The trail is waiting, and I am ready to listen.
I'm walking deeper into the woods.
The trees are closing in on me. I can still hear that radio static. The mud is thick and pulls at my boots. I've seen this fallen tree before. It's like the forest is playing a sick joke. I need to stop and catch my breath. Did you hear that branch snap? I'm reaching for my radio, but it's not there.
There's that red tape again.
It's tied in my father's knot. How is it here in the middle of nowhere? The path ahead is shifting. The trees look like shadows of the people I lost.
I think I see Marcus's rain shell.
I have to get out of here.
The voices are calling my name.
It's like the whole forest is talking to me. I fell down in the mud. Wait, I'm back at the cabin? There's a strange light coming from inside. My heart is beating so fast. I can hear Marcus laughing inside. I don't want to go in there. I'm at the doorway now. The room is completely empty.
There's that broken radio on the floor.
The radio is starting to speak. It's my own voice coming out of it.
I'm not the one searching anymore.
I stare at the radio, paralyzed by the sound of my own voice. It is not just a recording. It is a living thing that knows my fears. The air in the cabin grows colder, and the shadows begin to twist. The radio static shifts, and suddenly I hear Marcus's voice again. He is pleading with me to leave, but the cabin door slams shut. I am trapped in this rotting shell, and the forest has gone silent. I scramble to the door, pulling at the handle, but it will not budge. The wood feels soft and damp under my fingers, almost like rotting flesh. Outside, I can hear the sound of footsteps circling the cabin. I turn back to the room, and the radio is gone. In its place, a single red strip of flagging tape lies on the floor. It is tied in that familiar, impossible knot. I pick up the tape, and the moment my skin touches it, the cabin walls begin to dissolve. The wood turns into mist, and I am standing in the middle of the forest again. The trees are twisted, ancient things that seem to be watching me. I start walking, hoping to find the trail, but every direction looks the same. The forest is a labyrinth of moss and shadow. I am lost, and I know now that I will never leave this place. Then I see her, Aunt Ruth, standing behind a cedar tree, watching me. She doesn't say a word, but she points toward a narrow break in the brush. It is my only chance, and I take it without looking back. The path leads me to a dry rise under an old cedar. I find Marcus's rain shell hanging from a branch, zipped closed and empty.
Inside the hood, there are gray river stones, cold and heavy.
I touch one of the stones, and a sudden, sharp scream echoes through the trees. It is Marcus, and it is coming from the direction Ruth warned me away from. I know I should stay here, but my feet are already moving.
I run through the brush, my breath coming in ragged gasps.
The forest is closing in, the branches tearing at my jacket. I am running toward the end, and I am terrified of what I will find. I found the cabin, a rotted thing that shouldn't be here. Marcus was inside, sitting against the wall with his boots off. Sonia checked his pulse, but he was barely hanging on. He looked at me with this relief that felt worse than fear.
He whispered that it learned my name from the boy.
He told me not to answer when it uses tomorrow's voice.
Then his eyes shifted past my shoulder.
A voice behind me said my name. It was Daniel, but he was older now.
He stood in the doorway like a shadow made of fog.
It told me I left him there, and I knew it was true. Then the radio started crackling with all the voices we'd lost.
Carver raised his gun, but Sonia tried to stop him.
He fired, but there was nothing there to hit. Outside, the red tape started moving on its own.
Marcus grabbed my wrist and told me the truth. Then he just stopped breathing.
The radio kept talking, but now it was using our own voices.
Then Tiller screamed from under the floor.
Carver started clawing at the boards.
A hand came up, and it was wearing a ring.
Carver grabbed it, and the floor just took him.
He sank right through the wood like it was water.
Sonia and I just ran. We ran until we couldn't run anymore.
Figures stood between the trees, watching us.
And there was Ruth, shaking her head at me. I grabbed Sonia and hauled her up.
We stumbled through the brush.
The trees seemed to close in behind us. We finally broke out onto the trail near dusk.
It felt like we had been trapped for a lifetime.
We sat in the mud, finally silent. The dog teams found us sitting in the mud? Marcus Havel's body was never recovered. They used clean words to bury the truth.
Tiller was found 3 days later in the truck.
He was alive, but he was never the same. He never worked search and rescue again.
Sonia transferred to Mount Rainier. We spoke only once after that.
She hung up without saying another word.
I went to see Ruth Tolman.
Her niece told me Ruth had died months ago.
She warned me never to answer the woods.
I retired early, citing bad knees. Every January, my old radio turns itself on.
I removed the batteries, but it doesn't matter.
Most nights, it is only static.
Last night, it was Marcus.
He said the trail keeps coming back.
Tiller laughed softly in the dark. He asked why I wouldn't look at him. I sat there, refusing to turn around. Just before dawn, I looked out the window. A strip of red tape was tied to the cedar.
It's waiting for me.
I stared at that red knot on the cedar branch for a long time. It was the same knot my father taught me, the same one Marcus used.
Now it was here, right outside my own home.
I realized then that the forest hadn't just let me go. It had followed me back. I didn't go outside to cut it down. I knew that if I touched it, I would be inviting the forest into my life.
Instead, I pulled the curtains shut and sat in the dim light.
I just sat there, listening to the silence of the house.
The radio in the closet started to hum again.
It was a low, rhythmic sound that vibrated through the floorboards.
It wasn't static this time. It was the sound of wind moving through trees.
I felt a chill run down my spine as the voice began to speak.
It was Marcus's voice, but it sounded different.
It was like it was being filtered through miles of wet, heavy earth.
He was talking about the trail again, about how it never really ended. I wanted to cover my ears, but I couldn't move.
Then Tiller's voice cut through, laughing that same soft, hollow laugh. He asked me why I wouldn't look at him.
I realized he was standing right behind me in the dark. I didn't turn around. I knew better than to look.
The house felt like it was shrinking around me.
The walls were pressing in, like the trees in the Quinault.
I could hear the rain starting to fall again, not on the roof, but inside the house.
I closed my eyes and tried to remember a time before the forest.
I realized then that there was no escaping it.
The forest had become a part of me, a shadow that would follow me until the end.
I stood up and walked toward the closet. My hand was trembling as I reached for the door handle.
I opened the door and the radio was sitting there.
Its speaker was glowing with that same ghostly blue light.
It was silent now, but I knew it was waiting for me to say something.
I looked at it, and for the first time in 20 years, I didn't feel afraid.
I picked it up, the plastic casing cold and cracked under my fingers.
I held it to my ear, and I could hear the sound of the forest. I could hear the wind in the trees and the distant roar of the river. I knew what I had to do. I walked out the front door into the cold morning air. I started walking toward the tree line. I didn't look back, and I didn't listen to the voices calling my name. I just kept walking until the forest closed over me like a hand.